Suffering is the short road to spirit, is a common metaphysical saying. In that sense, trauma can be transformational. This means that suffering leads people quickly to connect with their own spirituality. If things are always fine, where is the motivation to grow or gain new insights, to think in new ways? If we don't know sadness, then we cannot appreciate happiness. In fact, the first noble truth of Buddhism is that life is inseparable from suffering. This is the premise, the base of the entire Buddhism philosophy: life is pain. Is suffering therefore necessary for us to evolve? The most unanswerable question of the universe is, why does God allow people to suffer? Does suffering need to exist as a catalyst for us to truly know ourselves? Without post-traumatic growth, does anyone ever become enlightened? Clearly, no God that any culture has ever conceived of wants anyone to hurt for the sake of hurting. Only one reason is big enough for any higher power to allow trauma. Suffering would have to be the oil keeping the entire machine grinding onward. Unfortunately, this necessity for spiritual advancement is too much for many people. The good news is that, at any point, people can decide to master their own suffering. Based on Joseph Campbell's hero's journey, this is the trauma hero's journey of post-traumatic growth. There are 3 stages of trauma processing, with the final stage representing post-traumatic growth. 1. Victim or injured. 2. Survivor or transforming. 3. Hero or transformed. A victim is someone who has experienced trauma. People in the victim stage are typically still in shock or denial and haven't truly begun to process. Depending on the trauma, people can stay stuck here for decades. A survivor is someone who has started feeling what there is to feel: shame, pain, and anger. A trauma hero or heroine has surrendered to all of it, metabolized the entire experience, integrated the trauma into their worldview, and undergone post-traumatic growth. Stage 1. The departure. This stage begins with a call to action that requires courage to accept. It is not uncommon for the traveler to initially refuse the call due to a fear of potential dangers. Stage 2. The initiation. This stage is characterized by a series of trials, tests, ordeals, and victories. Each obstacle serves to strengthen and transform the traveler. In Stage 3, the return, the transformed hero re-enters the ordinary world with gifts of enhanced wisdom and knowledge. Once achieved, she is now the master of 2 worlds as she passes the threshold back to her community. Her personal journey becomes an offering of inspiration and hope in the service of others. Psychologist Philip Zimbardo reports surviving a disaster or trauma makes you 3 times more likely to volunteer. 70% of adults experience at least one major traumatic event in their lifetime. 20% of people who experience a traumatic event will develop post-traumatic stress disorder. In general, 1 in 13 people will develop PTSD at some point in their life. 50% of children who experience trauma will develop PTSD. Of the people who develop PTSD, about 2/3 report experiencing post-traumatic growth. Could we interpret this data to mean that only 20% of adults ever leave the victim stage of trauma recovery? The person inching forward through the quicksand of the trauma often has no idea they are growing because they remain focused on emerging from the suffering. Metin Basaglu says, relinquishing control is the ultimate form of control. To move through trauma, survivors must let it push and pull them where it will. Because of this messy map for healing, it's common to feel no evolution has occurred. Positive psychology breaks down post-traumatic growth into 3 categories. 1. Finding hidden abilities. 2. Strengthening relationships. And 3. Shifted priorities and philosophies. Other sources report these post-traumatic growth components. 1. Emotional growth. 2. Better perspective on life. 3. Greater self-insight. And 4. Positively altered values. 5. Appreciation of life. 6. Personal strength. And 7. Spiritual change. Ongoing mindful exploration of all aspects of our experience helps us see firsthand what Socrates meant when he said, "The unexamined life isn't worth living." The survivor who follows the introspective road less traveled becomes increasingly free of compulsive and unconscious allegiance to unhelpful familial, religious, and societal values that were instilled young. The recovery now gets to choose her own values and reject those that are not in her own best interest. She develops a deeper, more grounded self-respect that is not contingent upon going with the herd and shifting with every new popular trend. In Joseph Campbell's words, the survivor learns to follow his own bliss. Own it. Make space. Tell trauma stories. In an article called The Secrets of Extraordinary Survivors, the author describes a female activist in the Congo who was kidnapped by the opposing political regime, raped, and tortured for 3 days. They left her bleeding and disoriented on the side of the road, and, weeks later, she discovered she was pregnant. She says, "Before my treatment, I wasn't able to tell my story to anyone. I was dead. Now I feel like telling it. It's my story. If processing my own trauma taught me anything, it's that nobody wants to hear about it. Not really. But I told them anyway. Because I needed to." There is almost no space to discuss these sticky topics outside of afternoon talk shows, group therapy sessions, and in relation to a piece of news. That's it. If you bring it up outside these acceptable situations, then you have poor boundaries and overshare. Survivors must claim their own space. We're here. We have uncomfortable stories. Get used to it. Jewish psychiatrist Viktor Frankl was sent to the Theresienstadt concentration camp in 1942. There he witnessed his father starve to death. In 1944, he and his family were moved to the Auschwitz concentration camp. He suffered the loss of both his mother and brother in the gas chambers there. Later, he and his wife were transferred to the Bergen-Belsen concentration camp. He watched his wife die of typhus there. In total, Frankl spent 3 years in the Nazi concentration camps surrounded by the worst suffering. When Frankl wrote a book about his experience, what did he call it? A Man's Search for Meaning. Sexist language aside, the title is basically, "Why does bad stuff happen to good people?" Without answering this impossible question, most victims can never graduate to post-traumatic growth. Survivors are compelled to literally unravel the universe to search for this meaning. The process of post-traumatic growth is little less than deconstructing the universe from atom to cosmos. Furthermore, no one can thrive as a complete, functional, vibrant human in a world where terrible tragedies and complex traumas just fall out of a clear blue sky. A world like that doesn't feel safe. Psychologist Stephen Joseph says, trauma creates a rupture in a person's life story. The only way to seal the rupture is to understand why the bad things happened. Dissecting why means post-traumatic growth. Living in a world where bad things don't seem regular is required to function. The only way to reclaim that feeling of safety after trauma is, as Frankl says, to search for meaning. In a live Q&A, a woman once asked famous author Eckhart Tolle how to deal with the suffering she had experienced from being the victim of a crime. He said, "There is in you a dimension that is beyond anything that could ever suffer." Tolle then points out the importance of not identifying with the pain. While, yes, the pain is present, the pain is not who we are. He also recommended surrendering to the pain because what we resist persists. For example, after a flashback, one might say, "Okay, pain, here you are again. I acknowledge you. I see you. I feel you. But I am me, and you are you. You are not who I am. For right now, you will be with me. That's okay. I accept your presence at this time." Telling oneself this kind of story, this self-narrative, will help avoid losing touch with that unbruisable inner element. Not surprising, Tolle's wisdom is a product of post-traumatic growth as his own childhood was traumatic. Additionally, in Neil Donald Walsh's series of Conversations with God books, the message is that the purpose of life is not to learn lessons. According to quantum physics, We are consciousness. Consciousness already knows what there is to know. Consciousness is awareness and infinite knowledge. We are not here to learn. Earth is not a school. We are human beings, not human doings. We are here to be who we are. What does that mean? After George Floyd was killed, for example, due to a police officer kneeling on his neck in 2020, were you angry and protesting in the streets? Were you on your couch reading the social media posts thinking, how awful? Did you turn to meditation and visualize healing, safety, and love for Black Americans? Did you argue that all lives matter? Did you turn the channel because you're not political? Did you donate to a bail fund? Everything that happens to us is an opportunity to express our beingness. In the face of trauma or joy or failure or receiving love, who are you? How does an integrated trauma story become post-traumatic growth? Alcoholics Anonymous philosophy, for example, discourages members from identifying with their stories. The ego loves to identify as a poor me victim. It loves complaining. A story of victimhood is the ultimate complaint for the ego. We arrive at post-traumatic growth needing to compile our story but not identify with it. Ram Dass says, in spiritual evolution, you don't destroy the ego, you merely turn away from identifying with it, to having it as a functional unit. Our egos are wrapped up in our fight or flight responses. Ultimately, the ego wants us to survive and feel safe. It's like a helicopter mom living in our heads. Post-traumatic growth requires walking that tightrope of, I need my ego to survive, and okay, ego, I don't need you anymore. This means gather and your story, until the need to express the story dissolves. This is post-traumatic growth, maybe even post-traumatic mastery. Do you think after what Frankl survived at the hands of the Nazis that he felt his suffering could lead to growth? He believed it so firmly that he created logotherapy, defined by Wikipedia as the premise that the primary motivational force of an individual is to find meaning in life. Some therapists chastise this search for meaning as intellectualizing. However, I believe having a framework of what the world is like is imperative for human functioning. This is why attaching to a healthy, nurturing mother figure is critical for humans. That imprint is a map for what Tibetan Buddhist Chogyam Trungpa calls basic goodness. It's a human programming method that codes us to believe people are good. The world is a safe place. When that understanding of reality is disrupted, reconstructing a new understanding is only human. The more you can dive into what happened and feel it, the better. The main objective is to get it out of you. This will just be something that needs to get done. Until it doesn't need to get done anymore. Personally, I made a scrapbook where I could craft my story page by page in full color with song lyrics, poetry, diary entries, academic essays, statistics, pictures, and all the room I wanted to be angry, sad, or hurt. I don't know why I felt compelled to do it that way, but it was extremely healing, empowering, and rewarding. The trauma came out of me and went on the pages. Whenever I need to, I can open the scrapbook, an external thing, something no longer inside me. Post-traumatic growth is reached when the story has been compiled, shared, released completely from every cell, then, eventually, set aside as to no longer be identified with. What are some trauma processing tools? 1. Journaling or scrapbooking. 2. EMDR, eye movement desensitization and reprocessing. 3. Talk therapy. 4. Anger releases like hitting a punching bag, throwing rocks, or screaming into a pillow. 5. Art, poetry, photography, and music. 6. Crying. 7. Volunteer or advocacy work. 8. Read and educate yourself. 9. Reclaim your power. 10. TRE, trauma releasing exercises. 11. Somatic work. Again, the main thing all these tools have in common are that they are ways to get the trauma out. To this end, Frankl explains, when someone finds that it is their destiny to suffer, they will have to accept their suffering as their task, their single and unique task. They will have to acknowledge the fact that even in suffering they are unique and alone in the universe. No one can relieve them of their suffering or suffer in their place. Their unique opportunity lies in the way in which they bear their burdens. Once the meaning of suffering had been revealed to us, we refused to minimize or alleviate the camp's tortures by ignoring them or harboring false illusions and entertaining artificial optimism. Suffering had become a task on which we did not turn our backs. We had realized its hidden opportunities for achievement. Rilke spoke of getting through suffering as others would talk of getting through work. There was plenty of suffering for us to get through. Therefore, it was necessary to face up to the full amount of suffering. There was no need to be ashamed of tears, for tears bore witness that a person had the greatest courage, the courage to suffer. Only very few realized that, like the comrade who answered my question of how he had gotten over his edema, by confessing, "I have wept it out of my system." What are some key insights for trauma therapists? Sometimes therapists say, more or less, you need to put a shiny, hopeful bow on your story, and talk about how you survived. This lack of awareness is unfortunately common. If one never felt trapped, empty, or worthless because of their trauma, then, I have to ask, are they still breathing? In the victim stage of trauma, the survivor will be broken, that is the very definition of trauma. If one is not broken, they are dissociated or weren't traumatized. The broken feeling may well last through the survivor stage as well. That's complex PTSD. Work on your own acceptance of the fact that some stories do not have happy endings. Period. Additionally, some trauma therapists encourage survivors to sleep in the dark, for example, with the light off, and do other things that are currently terrifying. Those fears resolve themselves as one starts getting the details of their story together and begins telling it. Allow safety. If that means sleeping with the light on for now, do it. My own recovery did not come from having more nightmares, it came from discovering the deeper layers. What trauma therapists can do, instead of trying to force or control a victim's narrative, is to empower the person to write their own stories, ones that are authentic, raw, ugly, messy. Spoon-feeding a trauma survivor a happy ending takes away their power and re-victimizes them. Trauma is uncomfortable, disturbing. Remember, we're here. We have uncomfortable stories. Get used to it. Give options, not advice, and let the survivor make their own decisions. That is the only way post-traumatic growth happens. When you take power away from survivors, and that is exactly what trying to clean up someone's narrative is, you're no different than the person or event that took their power away in the first place. Don't mess with survivors' voices. To put it in perspective, Dr. Brené Brown researches shame and vulnerability. She says, based on her research, that you can't be loved if you can't be seen. Telling one's unpolished story is imperative for being seen, being loved. If people can't know the real truth of who they are, they'll never own their trauma, it'll own them. The therapist's role is to be a grounded and stable presence, offering consistency, care, and safety. Resist offering praise for resilience. Survivors don't want to be congratulated for fight or flight. Respect CPTSD worldviews. Acceptance, grieving, and coping skills are key. What do parents complain about when kids get trophies just for showing up? It'll make the kids soft or privileged. Most parents believe that you can't talk to your kids about working hard, being responsible, or being strong. You give your kids chores, and work will teach them those things. Suffering is spiritual work. And those who don't get assigned these chores in life were given participation trophies by the universe. I truly believe that trauma, especially complex trauma, is a masterclass in conquering absolutely anything, which is something you can't buy, learn from a guru, train for at Harvard, or study under a microscope. Here's the thing, I'm not going to bullshit you. Vulnerability is hard, scary, and it feels dangerous. But it's not as hard, scary, or dangerous as getting to the end of our lives and having to ask ourselves, what if I would have shown up? What if I would have said I love you? What if I would have come off the starting blocks? Show up. Be seen. Answer the call to courage and come off the blocks, because you're worth it. You're worth being brave. Brené Brown.